All right, here we are again. Or at least that is true for some of us. You might be new, and if that's the case, let me welcome you. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown, and for everybody else, how is it with you today? I hope that your commute is going well, or your walk, or your jog, or maybe your breakfast, whatever it is that you're doing right now. I hope that the factors that are playing into your sense of well-being are ringing forth in a favorable tone. I'm doing pretty good. I had a very nice family day today. It's a little bit cold. Got a little bit cold, but we went out anyways. We went to Ringing Rock State Park. If anybody's been in the Lehigh Valley, there is a park called Ringing Rocks. And basically it's like this boulder field with these boulders that have like a high content of aluminum in them. I think that's the case. And then you just go and you bring a hammer and you walk around banging these rocks and they ring. They have these tones that ring out. So it's fun. The whole family equipped with hammers headed out to Ringing Rocks. Most of the time I just spent trying to make sure that my 3-year-old didn't slip and fall and bash her head in. And also, it's interesting myself in terms of making sure that I was being cautious in my own body. You know, I mentioned over the last few weeks that I have more time, and that's enabled me to take more opportunity to just observe my own body. And I have to say, be honest with myself. Like when you're running and you're going and you don't have the option, you can't really be honest always about what's going on in your body. You have to deal. But when you have more space and you really take a look at what's going on, sometimes you have to admit things to yourself. And I think I've been having to do that some. And you know what? I'll drop this because it's why. You see, just like a few days ago, I talked with Jill Miller. I don't know if you guys know her. She's a pretty high-profile teacher, and it was 8 days after she had her total hip replacement. And if you don't know Jill Miller, she's known for teaching like a more corrective or like therapeutic style of working your body in yoga. So for her to get a full hip replacement and then be public about it, which is like, it's a secret. It's like a dirty secret. There are lots of other senior yoga teachers who had hip replacements that no one ever heard about. But she was super public about it. And I talked with her 8 days after the surgery. And let me just say, like, shit got real on Yoga Talks podcast with me and Jill Miller. So you guys are going to get to hear that in 2 weeks. And the conversation was still ringing with me today. So I don't know. I'll tell you more about that when we listen to that conversation. What else? Oh, we finished the kitchen. I'm happy to report, for those of you who are curious, for those of you who've listened in the past and followed me on my journey into this old 1900 Victorian house that my wife and I got, we have been ticking off like big ticket items, you know, like the heating system and the plumbing and like radon mitigation system and a whole range of big things we had to make happen before we could ever get to like painting, you know. So we finished the girls' bedroom. We wanted to make sure that their room was done. So we had like this one room in the house that was done, but all the other rooms are like nowhere near it. But we managed to get the kitchen done, and it looks great. My wife is pretty brilliant in those regards. She's incredibly skilled and handy, and it's just nice. It's nice to walk into the kitchen and be like, wow, this is nice. So thanks to everybody who's reached out and asked how everything was going with the house. It's going very well. All right. Today on the podcast, I am talking to Sadie Nardini. And it's always very exciting and a little bit nervous for me when I have like a higher profile person or teacher on the podcast. I always feel like pressure on me. I want to do a good job. And especially when that higher profile teacher is controversial. And there's some people who love that teacher and other people who really hate that teacher. I always want to make sure that I'm going to live up to the responsibility of having this podcast. I've talked about this before. I don't really think of myself as a journalist, but I've had to accept that by default, having the podcast and bringing people on and having these conversations and sharing them puts me in this media position, and I want to do right by that. And with Sadie, when I went online to do my requisite research, it's impossible not to come up against like the things that people say about her. Like, people are really mean and ruthless when it comes to Sadie. And I felt like if I don't bring it up, it'll be another situation where people will feel like I didn't talk about things that needed to be talked about. But at the same time, the things that people were saying were really offensive, and I just didn't feel comfortable out of nowhere just springing, hey, someone said this about you, because I was worried that it would just be offensive and she would not be comfortable, and then we wouldn't have a good conversation. And I really don't like to have any pre-interviews. I never do that with the podcast. I try to have as little contact with someone in a sense, especially if I've never met them before, in advance of the recording. Because people want to do that. They want to have a conversation with me beforehand because sometimes, there's a nervousness. You don't know what we're going to talk about, and you don't want to say stuff that you might regret, or you want to feel like you're prepared. But if we do that, if I talk to someone in advance, what will happen is we'll end up trying to recreate the good moments from that, We'll have the real conversation when we're not recording, and then when we record, we'll try to capture some of what happened then. And to me, that feels stale. I want it to feel as fresh, like in the moment this was actually happening for me, it was actually happening for that person, and now you get to hear it. And that certainly happens today with Sadie, but I did email her in advance because I wanted to check with her. And she responded in a very, very cool way, which we talk about in the podcast when we get there later on. But it taught me a valuable lesson that is entirely relevant to what's been going on with the Me Too campaign and with men needing to learn how to get out of the conditioning that is blinding us. So I'll say more about that on the other side, and we talk about it in the podcast. It was real fun to talk to her, and I believe that it is very candid, and there's lots there, and I'm excited for you to hear it today. Before we do, let me drop my stuff. I'm going to be in Doylestown, Pennsylvania at Dragonfly Yoga just outside of Philadelphia on January 6th. I'm going to be in London at Tri Yoga Camden, January 12th through 14th. And I'm going to be at Triangle Yoga in Chapel Hill, North Carolina on February 16th through 18th. You can find out about those events along with the archives of this podcast and my blog and my online yoga video offerings. Speaking of which, I do need to mention something about the live stream. Those of you who've been listening know I've got this live stream subscription to all of my public classes with 24-hour access now. Well, up until now, that has been available at an introductory rate of $7 a month. which is pretty cheap. In fact, several people have reached out to me, those of you people who've been using it regularly, to tell me that they felt I wasn't charging enough for it, which I really appreciate, which is really sweet when people tell you that they think you should charge more instead of less. But we did that because we felt like we were still working out some kinks with the tech, and we were kind of using it as like a beta period. But we really have gotten it dialed in, and it's been going really great. So the introductory rate of $7 will be available till the end of this month, and then it is going to go up to $10 a month, which is still a pretty good value. You get access to 20 classes a month, 24-hour access to the most recent class for $10 a month. I think it's pretty good. We do our darndest to try to make it about providing value rather than extracting value. In any case, if you want to get in on the live stream at the introductory rate, you've got till the end of the month to do that. You can find out about all my stuff at jbrownyoga.com. Please, if you're listening to the podcast and you're digging on it, you might show some support for it. If you haven't, I want to say thank you to the few of you who went on iTunes and wrote a review so I don't have to see that negative one at the top anymore. I really appreciate that. If you haven't done that and you want to go to iTunes and write a review and give us some stars, that would be cool. Or you could also go to a blog or podcast page and make a direct donation. We are really looking at what we can do with the podcast, and often the issue is resources. And if you have the means, you might hook us up with a donation on the blog or podcast page. Okay, I think that's good. Let's go ahead and get to today's talk with Sadie Nardini.
Well, hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Gotcha.
Yay.
Cool. How are you doing? Are you settled in? Do you need to do anything first?
No, I'm good. I'm just going to put my makeup on while we talk.
Okay.
Today's a multitasking day, I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah.
But in a good way. Yeah, I'm getting tons of stuff done. I filmed an entire new course in a week and a half here. It's just been really productive for me to not be in a city, a huge city anyway.
Oh, where are you right now?
I live in Santa Barbara now. I moved.
Oh, that's cool. I know Santa Barbara. My brother went to school there.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's a beautiful place. And after I've lived in New York City for 16 years and then LA for a couple of years, I just, I've done the city thing for now, the big city thing. So this is a nice balance for me.
I totally understand. I just moved from Brooklyn after being there for the better part of 20 years to Easton, Pennsylvania.
Whoa.
Which, actually it's not as rural as it might sound, but it's not so dissimilar as you, because it still has flavor, like some of the things that were in Williamsburg 10 years ago before it got gentrified.
Yes, exactly.
So there's still kind of artist vibe and cool people, and you could still get a space for cheap if you wanted to.
Yeah, and it's strangely doable for a place that, it has the Starbucks and it has the stuff, but there is art, and I've been seeing some awesome music here, which is inspiring to my music side. And I'm going to, I went to an Austin blues guitarist last night, and tonight it's Lindsey Buckingham and Christine McVie, and tomorrow it's Alison Krauss. And I'm doing more here than I ever did in Brooklyn when I lived there.
Wow.
I
hear you. And the beach is there, which is nice.
Yes, I'm looking at it right now. I'm looking at the water. I'm not on the beach, but I'm in the woods.
Wow.
Up on the hill.
When my brother lived there, he lived in that 1 square mile next to UCSB. What's it called? It's it's really notorious. Every Halloween, there's a crazy party there because it's this square mile of all college kids. I can't remember the name of it. Oh my God, I'm blanking out.
It's not the Funk Zone, is it?
I don't know. It could be called that. My brother lived at this place, and they called it the Pit. And I'll never forget, like, one year, like, you know, it was like my big brother, and he went to school. It was like his first year in school, and he was gone and away. And like the first, like, Halloween that came around, again, it was like notorious for becoming this like kind of crazy, huge party, like this square mile. And so it was on the news, and there was like helicopters flying over, and they were reporting on like the crazy scene at UCSB. And like the helicopter like swooped down and like zoomed in on one particular house, and it was my brother's house. Because it had the pit spray painted on the outside. I mean, it was so funny. I mean, but
oh, that's awesome.
That's my memory of it. So I have it in my memory as this really rockin' town. So it makes sense that you would be there.
Yes. It's so good. I mean, just, you know how it is living in the city. I don't know what your apartment was like, but it's small for the price, and we're all kind of packed in there together as in humanity. And it's been really nice to have a actual house for the first time in 20 years.
I know, you know, for like 1/3 of what you were paying for rent before, like a month.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's incredible. I'm like, there are places in this house we have nothing in because we don't have enough things for the room.
I know, but that's a good dilemma to have, a better dilemma to have than trying to figure out how tight you can fit that piece of furniture in there, you know?
I know, I was always screaming, stack up. Just stack up, you know. Like,
right on. So cool. So you got a new thing going on in Santa Barbara. You said you just finished a course.
Yeah, I'm off the road. I booked nothing in person for all of next year. I'm really challenging myself to create online content and do a couple of things here in town if I feel like it. You know, and just not be running all over the world anymore because it was getting really exhausting.
Yeah.
And I wasn't, you know, I was trying to be a hunter-gatherer and a farmer at the same time, I guess you could say.
Interesting. That's kind of particularly interesting for me, given that I was nestled into this center for the last 10 years that I sold 2 months ago.
Oh, wow.
But now I'm like, I have all these invitations that I've never taken because, you know, I have 2 small children in a yoga center. So I was farming.
Yes.
So now this year I'm going to do the opposite. I'm kind of going the other direction. I'm going to like go travel around a bunch. My wife gave me permission.
Cool. She's probably like, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, well, I'm going to try to take her some. I'm trying to bring the kids and her some places, you know, and do some traveling. But I hear you because I don't by nature like to travel a lot necessarily. I'm definitely like a homebody. So
yeah,
it's interesting. And also just because I've done a lot of online content stuff too, and it's such an interesting question and an interesting thing. And also kind of, I guess, a little bit your roots, right? Like what I know of you is that you're one of the few people that I know who was successfully able to like utilize YouTube in like a really positive way. Like I think a lot of people use YouTube and it doesn't do much for them.
Yes, I found that's true. And I'm only just getting restarted again with my YouTube channel. I let that go to seed kind of because I was busy, and it's still there, but I've started to rejuvenate it, and it's been really lovely. But yeah, I was one of the first yoga people ever to do that on YouTube.
And when do you remember that? Like, well, first let me ask you, let's not start there. Let's actually find out a little bit before that, because I'm sure your yoga started before you started putting out YouTube videos.
Yes.
And I also read a little bio note, like when I did like a quick little like internet scan of you, I saw that you had like a illness, like a central nervous system illness, that you were like paralyzed for 2 years. Like, what was that about? And when did that happen to you?
Well, this is the crazy story. People might look at me now and think, oh, I'm 46. I'll be 46 in November. But I'm strong, and I'm like, rock who you are, and let's do handstands. I'll meet you where you are, but I'm capable of doing them,
Well, you know what? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just came from meeting with some folks at the Yoga Loft in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and they know you. You were there recently, and she specifically mentioned, like, when she was thinking about your workshop, she was like, bent arm handstands. Like, that's what she remembered. So,
yeah.
whatever that's worth.
Yes, we use physics. Yeah. Not holding a handstand with bent arms, but using bent arms to create ground reaction force through physics to get you up there much more easily.
Yes, I do the same thing whenever I would do a handstand too, so I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, cool. Well, so when I was 13 years old, I was a happy-go-lucky kid, just making my way through life, and I was in a swimming pool, and a grown man jumped on my head, like cannonballed full on into my head, on top of it, and broke my spine in 3 places, my neck twice, my mid-back once. And because of that, I don't say paralyzed, but partially paralyzed. Like my entire body, my muscle tone was gone. My muscles depleted. They weren't working properly. So I was crawling around and I couldn't breathe well. My muscles just went offline. So for 2 years, I would have panic attack, like 5 panic attacks a day, 8, I don't know, because my breathing diaphragm wasn't tracking properly. I couldn't move my body well, and I wasn't at all into yoga at that time, but my mother found me this book on her shelf. It was like a dusty old 60s book on yoga, and it had some really restorative postures and breathing. So for a couple more years, I just did restorative poses for hours at a time. I wasn't strong enough to do anything, not even a gentle kind of class. So doctors didn't actually know I broke my spine. This is where the disconnect came. And I wrote about this quite a lot of times, saying that it was spinal meningitis that had gone untreated, because by the time they saw me, by the time we knew there was something really wrong with me, and they saw me, I think I went home, and a couple of weeks later went into the doctor and was like, she's having panic attacks, she's having horrible migraines, she can't move, what's going on? And they thought it was spinal meningitis that they couldn't find anymore because it'd been too long since I came, since it happened. Mm-hmm. And they said, well, it looks like she melted her central nervous system somehow. They never gave me x-rays, so I didn't actually know that I had fractures in my spine for 20 years. Mm. They don't know how I lived and healed, without dying that way.
And I'm sorry, tell me again, how old were you when that was going on?
13 to 15 were the worst years. And then I think through the yoga postures and the long-held restorative stuff, and the fact that my body shut itself down so I wouldn't be able to move much to try to probably heal the spine and save me, because I believe the body has that type of intelligence, I was able to reset my body enough and I guess heal it that I didn't feel good for 20 years. I fought through constant fatigue and headaches and not being able to move like everybody else and having to really fight for every ounce of strength I gained. But I reset myself enough to be viable in the world. And I traveled like that and did all the YouTube stuff and all the starting to travel and teach for years and everything feeling that way, because I just thought, well, I guess this is the best it can get. And it wasn't until I found a chiropractor 3 years ago that he took x-rays of my spine and was like, what in the hell happened to you?
Wow. So first of all, I think it's interesting because it makes sense that, the line on restorative yoga is that it would trigger like nervous system responses. Yes. So it kind of makes sense that doing restorative practice would help you, given that you fried your nervous system.
Yeah, and I think it kept my spine in alignment and allowed it to kind of knit itself together and heal in spinal alignment, because a lot of those poses are built to keep your spine healthy and open. Mm-hmm. And I read about how the spine had to be placed. So when I began, I was really therapeutic. I was thinking ground up and skeleton or spine and pelvis is sacred, and then practice outward from that alignment. And then when I got into yoga classes, I found almost the complete opposite often was happening. Like all these people were very linear, like expression first and full expression, and then we'll get to the rest of it, mm-hmm. kind of ignore a lot of what I later learned as I studied deeply into anatomy with guys like Leslie Kaminoff and through him, Tom Myers and Paul Grilly and things, because I was hurting myself in practice. After all that gentle and therapeutic stuff, then I go into stronger practice, and it took me 10 years to get there, and I was very mindful and cautious. but I was still hurting my knees and my wrists and my jaw and my low back.
Yeah, where were you when you were first getting to yoga? Like, when you were 13, 15, you were like in school. Where were you growing up?
Yeah, I was in Seattle at that time.
Okay.
And
okay, and so you were in school in Seattle, and what was it like having all that pain discovered? Were you just like in public school, like muddling through?
I was in public school, and they had to pull me out because I wasn't able to move well enough to be in school. So I missed a good, on and off, I missed a good 2 years of school as well. So I had to come back. When we moved back to Iowa, where I'm from originally, for multiple reasons, but also to try to kind of get me back into a really good school that could work with me, I had to do things like go to math class and sit in a room by myself with a computer and try to learn 2 years of math and catch up with everybody, because I couldn't even be in the regular classrooms for some stuff, you know. And it was really traumatic for me. I just felt very isolated, very left behind. And the only thing I had was yoga. The only thing that made me feel like I was making progress, that I had hope for something, was my internal and external yoga practice. And that stuck with me as a healing tool in my toolbox that I offer to others. And it's interesting that so many people think I'm like, Sadie, you're going to go to class with her and, everybody's going to, and handstand and crunches. And that is the absolute, I mean, this is just epidemic of people thinking they know someone before they've experienced them. And I see it all the time. We can
talk about that. I mean, I think some of that is just the way the internet works, and the way some shit went down back in like the blogosphere days, I remember.
Oh yeah.
But I think what's interesting to me, and it goes to your point, is that, your thing that you do, it comes out of something. It's like you didn't like make that out of nowhere. Like, you have a personal experience that it comes out of, and I appreciate that a lot. And I'm glad that's where we're starting. And
thank you.
No, you're welcome. And I'm wondering, like, so you're back in Iowa and you're catching up, and then you're doing your own yoga, and that makes sense too, because I think it's something you can actually do.
Yes,
and that's very empowering because you could do it. And then, when do you end up getting into a yoga class? Is that in Iowa, or does that come later?
So, I'm sorry, my injury happened in Iowa. It didn't happen in Seattle.
Okay.
But because I'm just like, what's this timeline? I didn't do that in Seattle, but Seattle is where I took my first yoga class. That's
okay. So you were in Iowa.
I was in Iowa City, Iowa, when that happened.
Yeah.
So I'm growing up in Iowa.
At some point, you start to get better. How old are you when you start to get on the other side of it some?
Gosh, I mean, I'll never, here's the thing, I have to still go to chiropractors once or twice a week sometimes, depending on how much I move, because my body is built to house the injury, so my spine continually and my neck continually slips out. It's at the atlas too, so that's the worst place to move a bone around. It's right on your spinal cord, so, I manage it. I'm managing it, but to really answer your question, I think it took me a good 10 years, a good decade, to be able to walk into a yoga class in Seattle, where I was going to college forever. I started late for aforementioned reasons. And then I kept going because I loved Seattle and I loved the University of Washington. But there was not a lot of yoga past like hippy dippy, older kind of mantra chanty yoga circles and stuff, like 60s chicks, teaching their friends.
I know. We're the same age, so I started right around then too, like around 25 or something. It was when I was getting out of college is when I really started yoga practice. And so I was Jivamukti had just emerged, but they had just emerged,
Yeah. And if you're in Iowa or even Seattle at that time, there was no real yoga. There weren't any yoga studios like that, besides like, the kind of super classical stuff. And I did not vibe with that as in my 20s at all. In fact, I was like, you guys are this is like a cult. What is it? I've been studying a cult maybe. I like the poses, and the breath and the meditation, but I don't want to go in here and sit in your weird circle. I just I wasn't into it. I mean, anything my mom's age was doing, it was so uncool, so I went to, this gym. This is how I kind of fought into and became a yoga teacher. I did not ever think I was going to become a yoga teacher. I'm a musician tribe for sure. I just really needed to find some exercise. So when I started getting stronger on my own, like I could do a low lunge and I could do like knee down plank and stuff, I thought, well, maybe I could go to the gym and work on like the ab machine or some like the elliptical or something that helps my body and it's not too high impact. And so I was in the gym looking for the ab cruncher, if you can believe that. I didn't know anything.
I'm sure they had a machine back then that was called the ab cruncher.
They did. You lie on the floor and it's a bar and you kind of get in it and then you crunch up using it. It's I don't even know. It's bizarre, but it's funny that the first thing I sought out was some what I thought was core strength. But
you're not the only one who thinks that to this day.
Right. I know. We'll talk about that too. Yeah. So I saw this woman and she was beautiful. She was glowing. She was toned. She was kind of the epitome of what I wanted to be and hoped I could be someday. And I asked her what she did to get that workout at the gym. And she said, well, I'm a yoga teacher. Like, you're a yoga teacher? She was like 30, I pictured yoga as like all these old crones, like sitting around chanting and incensing each other. And she is just awesome. And she said, why don't you come to my class? I thought, oh shit, now I'm going to have to lie down on the ground for hours again. And then I'll have to go find a workout. I'll be here all day, but I didn't want to offend her. So I was like, I guess if you look like that, I'll try your class. Little did I know it was Ashtanga, like a mid-level Ashtanga class. So I died. I mean, the first pose we did, I was shaking and I had to get up off the mat. I walked around the room, like did a lap. I was like, woo, talking to people and they're down.
Walk it off.
I walked it off. I walked it off and I was talking to people. I'm like, is this really hard for you too? She's like, Sadie, you need to stay on your mat. Here's child's pose. Do it 100 times if you have to. And I don't think she knew I actually had to do it 100 times, but I started going to her class because she let me chip away at it. She wanted me to get in the back. She was nice about it, but she wanted me to get in the back row because I was distracting,
Well, that was old school Ashtanga days. If you couldn't do it, they put you in the back.
But
it's also interesting. It's also interesting to me because that is right around when Ashtanga hit the scene. And, and Leslie Kaminoff talked about this when he was on this podcast about how when that happened, that's what kind of allowed the gyms to bring yoga in a way. Because like you described, the hippy-dippy kind of thing that was before didn't fit so well in the gyms. But
not at all.
But Ashtanga had a aerobic component to it that made it make more sense. And it also kind of made it cooler or something.
It did.
Because it was more harder edge. And I was the same as you. Before I got into yoga, I was like a bass player, a starving musician in some band, and I toured around for a while. And I remember when I decided to make yoga my thing, it was some Wednesday night at 2 a.m, and we had played a gig for the sound guy, you know what I mean? And we were I was like, fuck this. And I'm I'm just going to do yoga. But I totally gravitated towards the same kind of thing first because it had more edge and it kind of suited my sensibilities more.
Yeah, it was, it was sensational. And I remember going into, I don't know, Barnes & Noble or somewhere at some point and looking for a yoga book. And besides I guess Light on Yoga, I don't know, and those older kind of classical books from India.
Some weird translations of the sutras or something.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, what? And then I saw one shining workout yoga book, it looked like, and that was Beryl Bender Birch's Power Yoga.
Oh, see, I really want to get her on. She was somebody who really brought it forth. Wasn't it more initially billed for runners?
Yeah, it was billed for runners, but it was fit younger people on a cover, doing yoga and being strong, and she said this is a cross training method for my runners group that we have, and it's working miracles with them, and their times are increasing and everything. And I just thought, well, hey, I could do that. And that's the kind that I was starting to do anyway. So she was a gatekeeper for this kind of Western yoga that we've got now, the more power yoga based stuff and the flow. She really extracted the asana portion of it, and she's gotten a lot of flack for that. I mean, I heard Gary Krafsow go off on her at one conference and be like, "Oh, you're, you and all the superficial physical only teachers." And I love Gary, but I was like, wait a minute, there's many doorways in, and I found the more spiritual practice by starting out trying to help and heal my physical body. So why not,
Well, I mean, it's interesting that debate carries on till today. And I think the question for me always is you have to kind of define your purpose. What
Yes.
are you hoping to get? You can use yoga poses for lots of different things.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's interesting though, because I started to feel like, at least for me personally, I don't really think of yoga as where I get my fitness so much. I'm almost feeling like I should go other places for fitness if that's what I want, and you can get it better there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I agree with you.
But it's interesting because what happened to me, which I think it sounds like might be what happened with you, is that Ashtanga, one of the things that it did for me is it kind of trained me to withstand pain.
Yes, me too.
It was all about mental stuff, and you read about training your mind and Raja Yoga and the sutras and fixed point and moving past the perceived limitations, which was also for me you were overcoming your stuff. I had my shit that I was overcoming. And so the mindset was, I'm going to overcome this. And part of that was withstanding whatever the physical discomfort that was being presented to me in the practice, was just getting through it and overcoming it.
Yeah, that taught me a lot about operating within intense sensation and still being focused. I mean, both you and I have trained in that for 20 years now. It's pretty
maybe
awesome.
Maybe to a fault, because that training of not even thinking of pain as pain. Sometimes thinking of pain as opening.
I know,
and it's become a problem now that I'm 45, and I've had to change what I do, and that's where I'm kind of going, because I'm betting you've had to change some too over the years.
Oh, I certainly have. I mean, when I was first starting out, I was in my 20s, and I just wanted my body to be stronger and feel better. So I didn't give a shit about any of the self-nourishment stuff necessarily, and the internal reflection. I just wanted to look and feel physically better. And so I ran at it. I mean, I'm very stubborn. There were times when I'd do a yoga class, and then even if I rested a lot in it, and I'd have to go home and take a 4-hour nap, and then I'd go again the next day, and then I'd go again. I went 6 days a week for 3 years. Mm-hmm. And I did not deviate, and I started.
I'm sorry. Did you have a primary teacher that you think of as the person who really got you going in it?
I did, but nobody. I mean, she certified me to teach. Then she moved to India way back in the day. Something.
I read that about you. See, you are the perfect example of how the training was back in the day. I always say this on the podcast. There was no scheduled 200 hours. You just showed up. You showed up consistently over time, and then what happened to you is what happened. They said, "I got to go to India. I need you to cover for me."
Yes, she said, "I'm going." She said, "You've been here. You know the practice. You've steeped in it over 3 years. Let me take you through a training of all the other stuff that you really need to know, and then I'm out." And she left, and I'm sitting there taking my teacher's place, not knowing. I mean, I had papers in front of me, oh shit, papers, the
notes. Everybody had some notes initially.
The notes, but that transmission was how it used to work. You have to remember, it's hard to remember. It's hard to remember what happened before the internet or Google Maps.
I know. Or 200-hour trainings, man.
Yeah, there was no Yoga Alliance. There was no school to train in like that. There was only your teacher and you and commitment and passing on the lineage. That's it.
Yeah, and so you're still in Seattle when you started teaching?
I'm still in Seattle when I started teaching. Totally terrified, but people really loved the class. And I was like, why? I'm just I don't sound like any other yoga teacher I've ever heard of. I'm like, I'm just telling you guys my truth and my experience, and hey, let's practice together. And
was that a model? Is that something that your teacher did too? Because I know, like, I don't know, how did you come to that? Like, was your teacher very different than that? Or how did you settle into having your own voice as a teacher right off the bat?
Well, my teacher didn't say much, so I didn't have a real template for saying stuff, for being who you are or not being who you are, which is kind of nice. I clearly understood the practice as she taught it to me, and the shapes and the movement and the breath cues and the why of that practice, but she didn't really insert herself into it. But I'm kind of an entertainer by nature, I like to share my views on things, and I'm geeky, and something will come up in my mind that I think is funny or applicable, and I'll just shout it out and say, hey, use it if you want, and and that just kind of became my model. And right from the beginning, I was getting positive feedback for doing that. Like, I love how you speak your mind. I like the things you say. Sometimes they're funny. Sometimes they're inspiring. Sometimes you're just really stupid, and I just
No, I appreciate it. I think I was the same. Like, I think because the teachers before me were still a little bit more in, like, the guru model or something, although that was starting to change when I came into it. When I started to teach, like, it was almost like the way for me to feel comfortable taking on the role of teacher was to like break that third wall more, and just like, and I enjoy that, like you. I think some people just have a natural tendency and enjoyment of being in front of people and sharing and being the facilitator. And
I was scared. I mean, my voice definitely grew over time. I mean, at first I was just like, I was afraid to say.
You had notes at first.
I had notes. I had places to tell them to breathe. Like, I didn't know everything, but over time, of course, like anything, you practice and you gain confidence. It's confidence is an outcome state of doing the thing you're afraid of enough times that you start to understand it.
Right.
And get to know it and know that it's probably going to work out. And even if it doesn't, like, you're okay. And to play with that, took me some years. But I started out just kind of, well, I guess I'm here, so I'm not our teacher. Sorry about that. She's not here anymore, though, so you'll have to deal with me.
Right.
And so I just have to be myself, because I'm not going to act like her. And if you like, I hope you like it, and you kind of have to, because this is the only yoga class there is at this gym, or probably in all of Seattle. I don't know.
That's right. So, nice. All right, so you're in it now. Now you're teaching, and how long before you start to feel like, I don't know how long. I'm trying to think how long it took for me. I don't know. At some point, you start to feel like you have a thing that you're doing, as opposed to the thing that you learned to do.
Yes. Well, that's where Leslie Kaminoff comes in, because after years and years of teaching and practicing this stuff, and going to other teachers who, were teaching different styles, similar styles, didn't matter. I was trying out different forms. And
was it mostly vinyasa stuff?
It was Ashtanga. I'd go to Ashtanga, and then I'd go to more creative vinyasa flow classes as well. And I noticed my body was starting to tear down. I'm in my 30s now, and my joints are hurting. I feel old. I can't move around my low back. I have sciatica now. Like, that's
me too. Shit starts to give out, especially when you're pushing that hard on your body in those kind of ways.
So I was like, okay, well, maybe do a little bit less. So I did a little bit less, but then it still kept hurting, and I was getting to the point where I had to start removing poses from my practice, common ones like plank, because my wrists really hurt, or, pigeon, because it would flare up the sciatica, and I couldn't even get out of my car anymore. I'm like, what is happening? So I asked all the teachers that I trained, with now. I'm doing other trainings, I'm doing stuff, and they all said the same thing. They said, well, just keep practicing. The poses will heal you.
You need better alignment, or just keep practicing.
Right. Better alignment. Okay, so I study alignment. I'm having these teachers check out my stuff. Still not happening. So I got really sick of it, and I moved to New York, thankfully, because New York is where Leslie Kaminoff is, and Leslie was really instrumental for me, because I just said, fuck it. I'm about to not have a practice anymore. I need to go learn some more anatomy.
Now, I'm sorry, had your YouTube channel already started happening before you met Leslie?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
So let's talk about that, because I
Sure.
study with Leslie very closely too, and he was very helpful to me. So I want to go there, but I'm curious about the YouTube channel and how that started. Like, when did you start to think about putting YouTube videos out, and how did you start putting them? You just did them on your own, on your laptop? Like, how did it happen?
Well, my progression was that I felt like Ashtanga was kind of hurting me. It was very linear. I was feeling over masculinized in the practice, and I already have trouble. Like, my imbalance was always, I'm a very masculine oriented person, fire based. I will go, go, go. I will achieve. I have a one-pointed focus if I want to, and I'm stubborn as hell, and I'll just do this practice until something stops me. I mean, so
me too. Once I get a good ritual going, I will just keep it going until I feel like it has to change, which sometimes is longer than it should, or whatever.
Right.
Go ahead.
Right. And so I just felt like, okay, I actually need, for my balance, a more nourishing, feminine-based flow kind of thing. So I did a lot. I started training in Vinyasa Flow Yoga. I started teaching more along that style. So I moved to New York and began teaching and heavily got into Anusara Yoga way back in the day. Like,
where were you teaching in New York?
I was teaching at a couple of studios. One was called this... Oh my God! It's called the Sal Anthony's Movement Salon.
I know Sal Anthony Movement Salon on
Fifth
Avenue. Of course,
yes.
It was one of the places early on that had yoga classes.
Exactly, and I used to teach there way back.
And they had reformer stuff, like Pilates stuff there too, right?
Yeah, I started teaching there, and they did the gyrotonics, whatever that is.
That's right. You know what's so funny about that? When I opened my center, my landlord, his name is Mike Fortunato. And he was super psyched about the idea of a yoga center opening up in his building. He lived upstairs. And I think the reason is because Sal Anthony set the precedent of the Italian guy who had this movement salon or something. So I don't know, somewhere in the thread of New York Italian culture, it's okay to have the yoga center now, because I think it is because of Sal Anthony Movement Salon.
Oh my God, can you believe it?
So you taught there. That's funny. Where else?
I started teaching there in 2001.
Mm-hmm.
So,
what other spots? Do you remember any other spots that you had? I know I had a list of spots, but I can't remember them all. Do you remember any other places you were at?
I used to teach at Essential Therapy until they got busted for having a Russian prostitute sex ring in it at night. I guess the sex parties would come in at night.
You were
during the day. I had the day shift, thankfully. I'd always walk in and go, "It smells like sex in here."
Oh man.
No. But I did teacher trainings there. That was the place. I ended up teaching at Yoga Works later on. And,
when they came into town.
Pure Yoga, once I got more fancy, and they wanted me to teach up there. And,
all right, so you're holding it down in New York. What year is that? Yeah. Do you remember? I'm sorry, that's a hard...
2001 to 2015 or 16.
All right, so we were both there holding it down, and that was really the boom.
Yeah.
That was the New York yoga boom, man. I remember, come 2002 and 3, it was private yoga was the Vogue thing, and
yeah,
I remember making a lot of money that year.
I know, it was good. I actually started, I managed East West Yoga, which is a huge center on 14th. I managed and taught there.
They had the bookstore and then the center upstairs, right?
Yeah. I managed and taught there for about 3 years, and I also started my own studios in New York. I did a lot. This is why I'm over masculine. I needed to just hop and chill. But I started Shri Yoga, which is, I think it's still there. It's in Tribeca. It was an Anusara-based studio. And then I started the Fierce Club, which it was only there for 2 years. The rents went up to $12,000 a month, and I wasn't doing that. But it was in Soho, so... that was cool. That was just my own, core strength vinyasa yoga studio. Once I started my style after studying with Leslie for 10 years, I, quickly realized something needed to change, so I changed it.
All right, so now you're in New York. It's 2001, 2002, which is exactly when the internet starts to, emerge more.
Yes.
So when does it first occur to you, and how does it first occur to you to do a YouTube video?
Well, I was sitting in my little Brooklyn apartment, and I was thinking, I was frustrated because when I first moved to New York to teach yoga, nobody knew who I was, and it's a big city. You got to get people's attention, and I didn't really know how to do it. So I went on to this thing, YouTube. I remembered people put videos up there. And I'm looking around for yoga, and there's like an old video of Iyengar from the 30s, and that was pretty much it. Then there's a bunch of kids like jumping off of roofs and trampolines and stuff. And I thought, well, maybe I could figure out how to put some yoga videos up here, and then people might find me, some of them in New York, and come to my classes. It's like free advertising, right? So I did not know how to film, edit, or upload anything. Didn't understand it, but I went to Best Buy and I said, talk to me.
Nice. What do I need to get a YouTube video up?
Yeah, I said, how do I do this? Somebody tell me how to do this. And a very kind man was like, well, you need this camera, and then here's what you do, and blah, blah, blah. And I figured it out. I figured all of it out.
Well, I think it's really amazing. I just want to come back to this moment of you going on YouTube and searching for yoga and not finding anything, because there's all these people listening to this podcast who only know the other world of nowadays, which is if you go Google YouTube, you get millions and millions of videos. Full-length content, no less.
Insane amounts. I mean, now YouTube is inundated with yoga. I think it could be, everyone thinks it's too much already, but only, I think, what is it, like 9% of America does yoga, so that's 91% to go. I mean, we've got a lot of room still, so keep creating and keep teaching and keep putting yourself out there.
Of course.
I think there's a huge market for it, but at the time, I was like, maybe somebody will watch it,
All right, so do you remember what your first video was? Was it like a class that you were teaching and you're like, let me record a class for everybody?
No, I recorded it. It looked like old 70s porn, like horrible lighting and dark and weird and creepy, but the information was good. So I got my couch out of my living room. I turned it on its end up in the kitchen. I mean, this is a very small apartment, as you know, Brooklyn style. So I had room for a mat. I think my first video was maybe how to do the splits or pigeon. I loved teaching those because those were two poses I never thought I would be able to do ever. So I had my lamp like turned over on its side pointing at me to give me more light. And I quickly realized after trying a couple that you can't film directly into the sun. Or you're going to be a big shadow.
Yeah. The lighting is the key.
It was a steep learning curve for me, but I thought, well, what am I going to do? Sit here and put flyers on 14? Like I need to do some things because I want to survive here. I want to live in New York and I need more people in class. So I just put it up there, and it was so funny. One day I was taking a nap.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.